Well, I think we should start. Hopefully she'll come.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Marjorie Wormser. I'm on the Worship Arts team. Welcome to the Morristown Unitarian Fellowship, where we weave together the strands of our separate lives. Welcome in this room and online. We are a welcoming, justice-minded congregation, and we are glad you are here. I have a couple of brief announcements. After today's service at 12 noon will be another installation of our Legacy program featuring Joe Erhane. Odyssey. What did I say? Legacy. Pardon me. Odyssey is Legacy Generation 2. Pardon me. I can always count on my friends to tell me the right words to use. This will take place at 12 noon. You'll be able to ask Joe questions afterwards. Refreshments will be served. Next week, we have a different format. At 10 o'clock will be an Odyssey program featuring Elbjorg Berkenkamp at 10 a.m. And at 12:30, we will be watching the broadcast of the Sunday morning service from General Assembly in Portland, Oregon, which is why we're doing it at 12:30. It's 9:30 their time. So this will be, now the Odyssey programs are broadcast via Facebook today and next week. Zoom. I'm sorry.
It's okay. The link is in my pastoral update.
The link is in Reverend Alison Miller's pastoral update. Zoom for the Odyssey. And next week's Sunday service will be broadcast through the UUA's YouTube channel, and that link will also be provided. And today's offering will be split 50-50 between the work of this fellowship and Black Lives UU, BLUU, and you'll hear more about that at the time of our offering. You can donate online, send a check, give cash if you're here. Finally, a question. Are you excited to hear about or speak about a topic during a Sunday service? Please let Reverend Alison or Lori Cross, please wave, or me, know. We'd love to help bring ideas to life. We'd love to help any of you learn and experience participating in a Sunday service, and we welcome your involvement. Thank you.
Can I get a volunteer to light our chalice this morning? Who would like to light our chalice? Any of the children in the room? You want to? Come. Okay. Oh, I thought we have a shorter person. Will you help the shorter person? We can have 2 chalice lighters. Thank you. Okay, actually, you're going to lead this. Will you lead us in our covenant? And do you want to help light it? Do you mind if I help you up on this chair? Is that okay? Okay, let's do it this way. Are you stable? Okay, good. Then let's take this. And then hold it carefully. And is it okay if I hold you? You can light it over here. There we go. Let's see. Whoops, almost. You know what I always like to say? Sometimes we need help to create a light. Isn't that true? Then we ask for help. See if he'll help you. Will you help her?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Thank you. There we go. Perfect. What a good modeling. Oh, we need even more help. Look at that. And that's when it takes 3. Oh my goodness. That was a very complicated chalice lighting. We promise to make it easier next time. Will you lead us in our covenant of this fellowship and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And I have one more question for you. What was the last words? Help one another, right? And is that what we just all did? All 3 of us had to help each other? That was perfect. And now let me help you. You want to jump down? Woo! There we go. Thank you. And now we are going to share in an antiphonal reading by Mark Morrison Reed, who was one of the first ordained African American ministers in our tradition. And he wrote a book, well, he's written a number of books that I commend to you. He wrote Black Pioneers in a White Denomination. I commend that to you, especially on this day where we're reflecting on history and the history of racial justice and our 8th principle. Marjorie will lead this side of the room, and we'll read the second lines, the italicized lines.
Okay. The central task of the religious community is to unveil the bonds that bind each to all.
There is a connectedness, a relationship discovered amid the particulars of our own lives and the lives of others.
Once felt, it inspires us to act for justice.
It is the church that assures us that we are not struggling for justice on our own.
But as members of a larger community, the religious community is essential.
For alone our vision is too narrow to see all that must be seen.
And our strength too limited to do all that must be done.
Together our vision widens and our strength is renewed.
I invite you to rise in body and or spirit and join in our opening song, Open My Heart, number 1013 in your teal hymnal and on the screen.
My
That beautiful music and hearing your voice reminds me that Stearns did a beautiful cabaret performance yesterday, and some of you may have missed it. We'll be sending out a link in next week's pastoral update, so you can enjoy. And I will just mention that I heard there were some CDs yesterday, and if there are any CDs around,
I happen to have some in my office.
I just thought I would plant a seed, because I'm guessing that some people were here yesterday and some people might have missed it and be feeling sad, but they don't need to feel sad, because you can watch Stearns on repeat or listen to Stearns on repeat in your car.
In your car, which is the only place where CDs are.
That's true, exactly.
Not my car.
Now, our Time for All Ages is it's called The True Story of the Grandmother of Juneteenth, Opal Lee, and What It Means to Be Free. And the words are by Alice Faye Duncan, and the art is by Katura A. Bobo. And before we begin, I'm just curious, do any of the youth or children know what Juneteenth, something about Juneteenth? Yes, Soren.
It's the anniversary of the Emancipation of slaves.
That's right. June 19th, Juneteenth, the contraction, so today, is about the emancipation from slavery. That's correct. And we're going to hear more about that story right now. Happy Juneteenth, Jamboree. Come and join the fun. Opal Lee waved to her great-grandson as he barreled across the park. He zipped past lines of picnic tables covered with platters of barbecue, baked beans, tomato tarts, and raspberry cobbler. And by the way, eating red foods and drinking red drinks is part of the tradition on Juneteenth. Slaves were not allowed to partake of those foods. He hurried past a leaping choir draped in purple robes. He danced a jig with cowboys playing fiddles, but they did not stop his flow. Buddy ran to the blooming tree where Opal Lee held court. Her braided hair was a silver crown. Her eyes were twinkling stars. Great granddeer, Buddy called, tell us a Juneteenth story. Opal Lee raised her face to the sun as memories of yesteryear filled her vision. When she had been a Texas bud like the children at her feet, Granddaddy Zach told freedom stories on his wooden porch. As Opal Lee remembered his words, she lifted her hands and cheered, Juneteenth means freedom. And now it's story time. Then Opal Lee began. Once upon a blazing sun, black bodies were bought and sold like cattle. Black men plowed the fields, but they were not allowed to own the land. Black women cooked the food, but were not allowed to feast on roast and ribs from the master's table. Black children cleaned the one-room schoolhouses, but were not allowed to read or write. Earning and learning were against the law. Slavery was a thief. American slavery dragged on like a plague, which means a lot to us this year. A hardship, a plague, something that cost lives. Dragged on like a plague until January 1st, 1863. That's when President Lincoln wielded courage and raised his feathered pen. He signed the Emancipation Proclamation with a mighty stroke. On the first day of January, in the year of our Lord, 1863, all persons held as slaves shall be forever free. Glory, glory, glory. Freedom was dazzling news like a bright starry night. However, Texas was big and many miles away from Mr. Lincoln. White masters defied his words. Black bodies remained in bondage. They plowed, they cooked, they cleaned. Freedom did not ring through Texas in 1863. It was toiling times in the Lone Star State, that's Texas, for 2 years, 5 months, and 18 more weary days. That's about 2 years and a half later. Then finally, joy jumped up on dancing feet in the Gulf town of Galveston. The year was 1865. The day was, can anyone guess? Was that what you were going to say? June 19th, right? That's true, right? Gordon Granger marched through Galveston with Union Army troops. And in fact, when Opal Lee tells the story, she mentions that it was troops. A lot of these troops were from New York and New Jersey, and they had finally made their way down to Texas. The general raised his booming voice and spoke these righteous words. He was born, by the way, in Joy, New York. Isn't that great? The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the executive of the United States, let's all shout this next line that I know you can see. Maybe those of you who can see it, who can see this line? All slaves are free. Singing filled the air. Happy tears rolled down like rain. Black families leaped through cotton fields and played tambourines. It was a day of jubilee, perfect for a Texas barbecue. Watermelon, again the red foods, and sweet potato pie, delicious delights they had been denied during servitude. Opal Lee danced in a circle, freedom, hope, and joy divine. Juneteenth means it's freedom time. Can you imagine the excitement? Opal Lee told the children, remember my words for safekeeping. Remember what I say. Juneteenth is bigger than Texas singing or dancing bands. Juneteenth is freedom rising, and freedom is for everyone. Juneteenth is you. Juneteenth is me. As the children clapped and cheered, Buddy tugged her sleeve. Great grand dear, he called. What was Juneteenth like when you were a kid? Opal Lee unwrapped another story. Blacks and whites lived separately when I was a child. Jim Crow signs littered Old Fort Worth in every public space. Black families were banned from Forest Park Zoo, except one day of the year. On Juneteenth, we could picnic, party, and ride the Ferris wheel. I hated that zoo. I loved it too. The birdhouse was my favorite. Buddy groaned and shook his head. The old days don't sound good. Good and bad work together, like the sun and rain. I spent good days on my granddaddy's porch reading poetry books. His farm was my playground. I ran across the fields and climbed the tallest oak. Glory, glory, glory. Some memories are chocolate sweet, but some memories cut and bruise. My saddest season started on Juneteenth Day, 1939. An angry mob with flaming sticks burned my family's brand new home. Their broken minds and evil hearts were so afraid of Black progress. The police made no arrests. My family moved away. And yet, the embers burn. That fire still lives in me. I learned a big lesson that Juneteenth Day. Freedom is a golden coin. Struggle makes it shine. And no matter how long it takes for freedom to stretch across the land, I will keep on teaching. I will keep on reaching. I will keep on walking. I will keep on talking. I will raise my voice on the prairie and the mountaintop until freedom rings. The children lifted their hands in praise. Freedom, hope, and joy divine. Juneteenth means it's freedom time. Opal Lee winked and chuckled. I think now it's time for barbecue, strawberry cake, and red Juneteenth punch. Glory, 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 Bud cheered and waved his hands. When he bounced up to leave, Opal Lee hugged him tightly. Then, just like birds in flight, all the children flocked into her arms. Opal Lee studied their shining faces. Black, brown, bronze, gold, tan, white, freckles. She rested against the blooming tree and whispered into the wind, "Remember my words for safekeeping. Remember what I say. Freedom is for everyone. Juneteenth is you and me." As the children dashed away, she marveled at the bright future. And therein lies the end of our reading, and I commend this book to you. And we have a poem later on in the service that has also been turned into a children's book that I commend to all the families. And now it is time for our offering. 50%, which goes to support the works and ministries of our congregation, and 50%, which goes to support Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism, a national ministry serving our children, youth, and adults who identify as Black and Unitarian Universalist, as well as causes that they choose to support in the wider community. Thank you for your generosity. It makes a difference.
Stearns, thank you so much for that beautiful, beautiful interpretation of We Shall Overcome. We are savoring all the remaining Sundays you are with us, and these halls will ring with the music that you have given us. Thank you. So this morning's reading is entitled Free at Last. It's a Juneteenth poem written by Sojourner Kincaid Roll, who is the poet laureate of Santa Barbara. And this poem has been transformed into a children's book based with the words of the poem and is set to illustrations. General Granger brought the news to Galveston. The war is over. President Lincoln signed a decree. The Emancipation Proclamation declares all who live in bondage here shall from now until be free. After 300 years of forced labor, hands bound, descendants of Africa picked up their souls, all that they owned, leaving shackles where they fell on the ground, headed for the nearest resting place to be found. Some went no further than the shack out back, often only a lean-to shed, hard ground for a bed, hard labor, no pay, but the will to survive. Though they couldn't call it their own, they still declared, "This is my home." Some went to the nearest place of the Lord, to some hollow place in the brush or a clearing in a grove where folk gathered 'neath the still-standing tree and sang, "Thank you, Jesus, for delivering me." Some ran as far as they could go into the service of the man on the neighboring land, working for a pittance and a little plot of space, which like they did as a slave. Some made a beeline for the nearest saloon, singing a song, picking a tune, toasting to the Union and the lady luck, setting to flow, dancing the jig and the buck, patting themselves on their whip-scarred backs, carousing from night until day. Some went the way of the river, following the Rio Grande or swimming the upflowing Mississippi, hastening to get as far as they could, thrusting their futures into sanctuary and friendless, unknown territory. Some kept running like a stone on a hill, never to grasp a firm place to rest. Some even went to the promised land. Wherever they went, alone or abreast, at the end of their journey they cried, "I've done my best." Every year in the Lone Star State, and then in the towns from sea to sea, sons and daughters of the ones who were held celebrate the time when their forebears got the news, "The war is over, all men are free." They will always remember, they will never forget Juneteenth, when their forebears could shout, "Free at last, hallelujah, I am free."
Just asking, Alex, do you have handy that picture of the author of that poem? Just so people can see. She wrote this poem in 2013, a reminder that Juneteenth has been actually celebrated since 1866, but in larger and larger ways. And this is a new setting for her poem, which is a children's book. So I wanted you to see that, both the author and the newest version of her work, which is just out. Thank you, Alex. It is the time in our service where we honor the milestones, the joys, the transitions, and the sorrows that have happened in the lives of our fellow congregants, friends, and visitors since we were last together. The first thing I wanted to share is a milestone from my family. Is a huge thank you to all of you for last week. It was incredible from I'm sure Stearns would agree too, just the incredible words of kindness and appreciation, the delicious food, the bouncy house was a definite highlight, that the weather cleared up for the lunch, and just the incredible outpouring of love from you to us. And it was amazing. So thank you. A milestone of gratitude. Thank you. And now I have 3 milestones to share that are milestones of loss and illness. So this has been a challenging week for our folks. The first is from Noelle Jensen. Thank you for sharing this. On behalf of Carol Todd. Carol Todd's brother, Richard Todd, passed away on June 8th at his home in Tennessee. He is survived by Carol, who went down to be with family, his wife, Susan, his children, Becky and Matthew, and their families. Let us hold Carol and the entire Todd family. And may Richard's light and his legacy and the stories of his life burn brightly in their hearts. From Marjorie Wormser, a very sad milestone. Please send good thoughts and prayers on this Father's Day to my very close friend and music partner, whose 23-year-old son was found 2 weeks ago today with a fatal gunshot wound. There are no answers at this time as the investigation is ongoing. With or without answers, the surviving brother, parents, and grandmother are devastated. Let us hold in our hearts that father, the whole family, Marjorie. May the light of that young adult, the lessons of his days, the stories of his life burn brightly in their hearts. And may we who are in this room continue to engage in the important work of gun violence prevention. That child's life mattered. That adult's life mattered. And we will honor this loss and remember our place in causes of healing and justice. And we surround Marjorie, our beloved congregant, at this time as she seeks to support and be present to this loss of her partner. We will be present to her. May it be so. And a milestone about Judy Oler, also a significant milestone. Judy Oler had a stroke, a very serious stroke, followed by a heart attack. And she is in St. Clair's in Dover. And I was with the family yesterday. She has entered a hospice, and she was able to communicate yesterday, and she was, I have to say, surrounded by, at that moment, by her son David and his wife and her 3 of her grandchildren, Levi and Zach and Abby. And Abby was showing pictures, and Judy was asking for stories, and it was a tender time. But let us all surround John Oler, our beloved member, her beloved husband of many decades, and let us be agents of healing and care in the days and weeks ahead. May it be so. And one final short prayer. Spirit of life, Spirit of an abundant love, flow in us and through us, in our lives, in our song, in our spirit, in our playing, in our dancing, in our justice work, in our hugging, in our caring, in our tending, in all we do, in all our days. Help us to be a people who are cheerleaders for one another, who celebrate alongside each other in times of great joy, in times when one more step of justice has been achieved, and in times as we imagine co-creating the beloved community here in our congregations and society at large. And help to fashion of us a people who buoy each other up in times of sorrow and who are willing to go down deep in times of tragedy. May we be a healing presence, a spirited presence, a joyful presence, a community presence in each other's lives. Amen, and blessed be, and may it ever be so. Oh, there was. I only have 3. There's one from Alan Hicks. And we have a great joy as well. That's wonderful. From the Hicks family, Alan and Vicki Hicks. 30 years ago, on June 14th, we said, I do, to eat, drink, and be married. Yes, we are still keeping up with our promises as long as our lives don't give up on us. We live up, don't, what is it? Oh, if our livers. These guys are always testing me with their handwriting. Well, I gotta say this. They are some of, well, Vicki especially, is one of the best cooks in the fellowship. So I think that's a great eat, drink, and be married is a great set of vows. And may your livers live long.
Vicki makes great liver. You should.
May the spirit in this place always move in the form of humor as well. I forgot that in my prayer before. Amen, and may it ever be so.
Let's sing together. I invite you to stand, rise in body or spirit. Number 168, One More Step. One more step, we will take one more step, till there is peace for us, and everyone will take one more step. One is heard by everyone. We'll say one more word, one more prayer. We will say one more prayer till every prayer is shared by everyone. We'll say one more prayer, one more song. We will sing one more song till every song is sung by everyone. We'll sing one more song.
Last year, at the age of 94, Opal Lee stood by President Biden and held the first African American vice president's hand, Kamala Harris's hand, as President Biden signed Juneteenth into law. She was in that honored position next to the president because she is known as the grandmother of Juneteenth, and because at 89 years of age, she started marching from Texas to Washington, D.C., and gained over 1.5 million signatures in her effort to raise awareness of the holiday and to spread it from Texas across the land. She was not alone in her efforts, and yet her persistence and her imagination stand out. Opal was born in Marshall, Texas. Her family later moved to Fort Worth, Texas, where her father built a beautiful home. The problem was that it was located in a white neighborhood, and many neighbors didn't want her family there. In fact, on June 19th in 1939, when Opal, and I know some of the children in this room are about this age, when Opal was only 12 years old, 500 of the neighbors gathered round her house and burned it to the ground. There were about 15 police officers present, but nobody did a thing to stop it. No one was arrested. No one made restitution to her family. The local papers didn't even carry the story, but it did appear in newspapers elsewhere. But that fire ignited a passion in Opal for racial injustice and for making the world and our nation specifically a better place for her, for you, and for me. Imagine staring at that loss. Imagine staring at that level of hate. Many in her situation might not want to remember June 19th, given such a harrowing personal anniversary. But Opal saw in the embers the possibility of building our nation anew, including how we teach about our history and how we move forward together to co-create something more whole and more holy. She became the force of nature who galvanized a nation to reckon with its past and to march on to its future. Now, let me be clear. Opal has been interviewed recently. She does not think that things are good now or complete now that the holiday is official and offices and schools will be closed tomorrow. She is clear that things must change and that our nation's present continues to be rife with racism. As she reminds us, none of us are free until all of us are free. She adds that this is not a holiday just for Blacks or Texans. It's about figuring out where oppression continues in our community and who is impacted. Among the topics that Opal lifts up are economic bondage and homelessness and disparities in education. She wants us to be a people who are willing and ready to tell the truth, the ugly parts, as well as the beautiful parts, and to find a way to heal from the past and the present and to make change. While we now have a new day off, Opal invites us to think of it instead as a day on. It's a kickoff to 365 days of devoting our lives to the movement to build the beloved community. It's an annual spiritual checkup as far as your personal commitment and a collective check-in as to the health of our nation's soul. Now we have 2 opportunities, which is fitting for dismantling a legacy so large as racism. MLK Day and Juneteenth are both opportunities to renew our commitment and to build our courage for the journey. When we speak of the beloved community, we could also use this language, the kingdom of heaven on earth. It comes into existence when we co-create realities and communities. That's what we try to do here, to be a community that treats the global human community as one family, as one kin, as worthy of love with no exceptions. Dr. King spoke about this quality of love as agape, a love overflowing for all of humanity. And it is so clear that Opal has this. It is a fierce and faithful love that is not limited by a narrow concept of liberty, meaning liberty often only for some, but rather a wide vision of liberation for all. Our country was founded by white men whose sight was limited. Yes, they introduced virtues of liberty and democracy and imagined and created a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. The problem is that their democracy was based on that narrow concept of liberty, and their government was of some people, by some people, and for some people, specifically land-owning white Christian men only. In fact, these only some men used the corrupt teaching of the church from the 1450s, the doctrine of discovery, to assert that they could arrive on these shores, that they could take land, and also take any non-Christian inhabitants of any nation outside of Europe or here by conquest or by purchase. They took liberties, all right, especially on the topic of who had status, the status of a person, and who mattered. At the founding of our nation in 1776, many persons were relegated to the status of property. Women, everybody in this room who is a woman, a child, Black, Indigenous, all of these would have been considered property. Patriarchal white supremacy has been woven into the fabric of our country's democracy from the beginning. Remember our nation's Capitol building, also called, it had this name and still has it, but we don't always use it, the Temple of Liberty, was built by the hands and on the backs of enslaved Africans. This Juneteenth is surrounded by the hearings for the events that happened on January 6th at that building, which were deeply disturbing. The sight of white supremacists storming that beloved building and calling it over and over the people's house, meaning their house like they alone owned it, with their narrow vision of liberty and their insistence that white lies matter more than truth. It was disturbing. but not surprising. When we think about the contrast in the reception of these violent white supremacists as opposed to the reception of Black Lives Matter protesters in that very spot, we are witnessing for whom those doors were originally built to open. Yes, the police did take measures to try to stop them, but not at first, not until they had really breached far up compared to other, especially Black protesters in the past. Even this past week, Stephen Colbert's crew got arrested for coming close. So it is a question, how did white supremacists, whose intentions were known and widely publicized on social media, make it so far up the steps? However, that is not the whole story of America or how we hope it ends. On the very same day, we tasted the sweet fruits of a liberating love. It was also the day when newspapers carried the good news that community organizers in Georgia, particularly women of color, had successfully overcome voter suppression, leading to the result that a Black man, Reverend Raphael Warnock, the pastor of Dr. King's home parish, and a Jewish man, John Ossoff, were elected to the Senate to have a seat in that house. When we are inoculated by agape, by that overflowing love for humanity, then the white lie that we can only create individual liberty for some that spreads the persistent pandemic of racism is halted in its tracks. It is now replaced with the healing antidote of working for the well-being of the collective. And finally, we can construct a democracy that is a temple of liberation. Part of our work for the next 365 days, and especially today, Juneteenth, is paying close attention to the ways that racism and injustice persist in our nation, threatening the soul of our democracy. It bears mentioning that New Jersey was the last northern state to relinquish the practice of slavery, and now stands in the position of first in terms of the worst racial disparities in mass incarceration. Juneteenth involves facing the fullness of our history and our present, including gains and setbacks, and charting a course to organize for a brighter future. Here is a sampling of what we need to know from our history. In 1713, the slave code, the new slave code, banned freed slaves and their children from holding property, effectively denying them the right to vote or hold office, since the colonial period required these for the vote and the right to serve in public office. When the American Revolution broke out, when we celebrate the freedom of 1776, in that year, slaves made up, can anyone guess what percentage of the population in New Jersey? Just any guess. It was 12%, which is still huge. 12%. Under the New Jersey State Constitution passed in 1776, aliens, free African Americans, as well as white women were given the right to vote. This expansion of suffrage remained in effect until an 1807 law limited suffrage to free white men with 50 or more pounds of property, and that restriction held until 1875. It sometimes is a story of gains and then losing gains. We need to know that because some of that's happening now. The 1804 Gradual Abolition Act was a response to factors and a product of self-interested political wrangling on the part of state legislatures. Members of New Jersey's Democratic Republican Party supported the abolition bill, employing Revolutionary War-era rhetoric to declare that they were on the side of liberty, while the old Federalist Party was run by elites. Now, that party, the Democratic Republican Party, succeeded, and on February 15th, 1804, the legislature passed an act for the gradual abolition of slavery. But citizens in Bergen and Morris County petitioned the legislature to repeal the 1804 act on the grounds that it was unconstitutional. But thank goodness, our neighbors did not succeed. When the Civil War ended and slavery was abolished, there was a brief period of legal protections to enfranchise Black citizens. Not long after, though, in a process to certify President Rutherford Hayes, a deal was struck that launched the Jim Crow era. In exchange for Hayes' victory, he removed Reconstruction soldiers from the South, and many civil rights that were gained were lost quickly. Again, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and many of the advances ushered in by it were eroded by the new Jim Crow era, the system of mass incarceration that led to voter disenfranchisement, legalized discrimination in housing, employment, and more. Again, it is not a linear story of onward and upward and progress forever. We need to pay attention and constantly struggle for liberation to succeed. We must pay attention to the ways that the virus of white supremacy reinfects our communities in mutated forms. We say it is un-American to allow a violent display of white supremacy at the Capitol. Well, let's work for the day where this is undisputedly true, because there is a long history of virulent, vitriolic, and violent racism in the halls of power. A few years ago, we decried the policy of separating parents and children and putting them in cages. We called it un-American. But our economy was built on the separation of parents and children, and we still make profits off of caging Black and brown and poor people, and sometimes Black and brown and poor youth. We must inoculate ourselves with agape, a fierce and faithful love that is not fooled by a self-deluded image, but looks clearly at the chasm between individual liberty and collective liberation, and takes the leap strategically and repeatedly. So I invite you to pay attention to the efforts going on with New Jersey Together and Morris Area Together. One example is helping citizens, returning citizens who have served their time in prison, finding access to fair housing. Be involved with UU Faith Action's efforts to ensure that we move forward on the rights of reproductive justice, which is different than simply access to abortion. It's about ensuring that those who are disproportionately impacted, especially women of color, including Indigenous women and Black women, have access to the ability to have an abortion if that is what they want, or to have a pregnancy, to carry a healthy child to term. This is what reproductive justice is about. And if we learn about the legacy of racism in this country, we will know how systematically Black women have been denied access to both of these things. A third thing I want to lift up, and then short closing words. Let us not allow the teach-ins that happened around Morris County, where our students, especially Black students, in the schools testified to their experiences of microaggressions, to their experiences of an absence of Black history being taught in the schools, to their experiences of Black children being funneled not into the college preparatory sections of their grades. We need to check on how things are going today, a couple of years later. Now, one positive result of the listening and organizing led to the Morris School District Black educators forming an alliance to hold the schools to greater accountability for change. But a cautionary note, the Equity and Inclusion Alliance that I was a part of was meeting up until the pandemic, up until we learned that the African American rates of graduation were declining once again, and then it hasn't met in a year and a half. Pay attention to how racism is mutating and infecting our community today. America is not just who we have been. It is not just who we are. It is a vision of what we can yet dream and dare to be. It is a vision of 12-year-old Opal looking at the fire, at the embers, and saying, we, together can create something better. And may everyone gathered here today be a builder of that temple of liberation, whose doors are open wide to all who call this country home. And as Coretta Scott King says in the quote at the top of our order of service today, this work of anti-racism, of building the beloved community, is the work of every generation. May it be so.
There is a change from your order of service. It says, "Come and go with me" in there, and we're actually going to sing a song that we did a few weeks ago, "A Cleansing Rage." It happens to be, unfortunately, it keeps being appropriate in the world. So I invite you to rise in body or spirit. A cleansing rage wipes away my fear. A cleansing rage uproots all hesitation. A cleansing rage burns deep in my soul. May this rage make us one, make us whole. A sacred rage calls out falsehood and greed. A sacred rage. Its truth be known. A tearful rage fills and believes what is spoken. A tearful rage burns deep in my soul. May these tears make us one, make us whole. Restores our hope, a loving rage, font of resilience, a loving rage burns deep in my soul. May this love make us one, make us whole. May our love
And now, in our going, may the light of love bless us and keep us. May it shine down upon us. May it radiate out from within us. May it be gracious unto us. And may it make all of us builders of the beloved community, celebrators of fathers and grandfathers and mentors and role models. May it make of all of us dreamers and strategizers and a resilient people ready to fulfill the work of justice ahead. For this is the day of Juneteenth, where we celebrate the unfolding story of freedom and see ourselves in it, in the collective unfolding of liberation. So yes, isn't that something that brings joy? Yes. Let us rejoice and celebrate in it. Blessed be one and all.